You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, we are live. Happy Sunday. I hope it's a good one for you. So today, we are going to examine Andrew Tate and look at how Tate turned his early victims into enforcers and ultimately indicted human traffickers. In addition, we're going to contrast and compare Tate's tactic with convicted sex trafficker and NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere and discover the bottom bees of NXIVM's secret sorority, Allison Mack. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Allison Mack's relationship with NXIVM and compare it a little bit with Andrew Tate's relationship with his, what he calls his bottom bees. He uses a different word, rhymes with witches, starts with a B. And if you're new here, welcome. I covered 3 sex trafficking trials in New York City, starting with Keith Raniere's, the NXIVM defendants, went on to Ghislaine Maxwell's, and recently Larry Ray's trial, the Sarah Lawrence College, my alma mater's cult leader trial. And when I first saw Andrew Tate, I really thought that he was the love child, had to be, of Keith Raniere and Larry Ray. So first off, I just wanted to look at Andrew Tate in his own words, and this is from Milk Bar TV. I really encourage you all to subscribe. His Andrew Tate videos have been excellent. The link is in the description of this episode, along with the documents, the Romanian documents that charged Tate and his brother and his 2 bottom bees, Georgiana Nagal, and Liliana Radu. Hold on one second. So this is Andrew Tate in his own words.
They accusing you of using violence, or
no? They're accusing me of using the Loverboy method, coercing them by being nice.
I don't mention webcam until after I've had sex with the girl. If you're on dates and you're trying to mention it and shit, it just doesn't work. It puts them off. I'd never do that. That's disgusting. I'm not a whore. It's just not gonna work. You continue as normal, no mention of webcam. You fuck the girl. After you fuck the girl, you do the PhD test.
So yeah, on CobraTate.com, I have my PhD program, and that is PhD is a pimp and hose degree that I'm
clever.
And
Clever.
That teaches basically how I got girls, how I met girls, how I got girls to like me, how I got girls to fall in love with me to work on webcam for me.
Oh, and you're always working. Why don't you work for me so we spend more time together? Work for you doing what? So I'll have a webcam business. Oh, I don't want to do that. So, okay, I know you don't want to do that, but listen, come, let's have a meeting. Let's just talk about it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. Fine. But let me explain it to you properly. In fact, I'll bring one of the girls who works for me. Your bottom bitch is the one who does the selling. You don't do the selling. The girl has to hear it from a girl. And this is where your bottom bitch has to be trained. That's why I said it's so important to have a good first girl.
Because that's what I did. That was my MO, was find girls, make them love me, and make them work for me.
This girl's like, okay, well, I'll try it. Put both girls on camera together the first day. So the new girl can sit there and just sit with the other girl and get drunk. Give him a bottle of vodka.
First night that I worked for him, Andrew bought me like 5 bottles of wine. So I got completely drunk because I'd never done webcam work. So I was very, very nervous.
And that's how I got rich. So that teaches everything I know from start to finish about not only getting girls, not only obtaining them, but retaining them, because that's a completely different game as well.
And over time, I just built up this big little empire of webcam girls. At one point, I had 4
Okay. So I've heard other people defend Andrew Tate and say that what he was doing was some kind of trafficking light. But there you see, basically he's saying, I'm being prosecuted for being too nice to my victims. But that is entirely, how do I put it? That's a technique, also known as a Romeo pimp. That is a coercive technique. So he starts out saying, let's get in a relationship. I'm falling in love with you. I want to marry you, etc. And he's bragging, this woman will do anything for me. She wants to marry me, have kids with me. So that's my bottom B. She'll do anything for me. And then that is the woman that really does the enforcing. From what I was reading in the Romanian documents, Georgiana was collecting all the money. Very similar. And also heard another interview with Andrew Tate where he says, I don't own anything. Very much like Keith Raniere, who was a renunciate, who said, I renounce the world's materialistic pleasures and I own nothing. But really what it was a tactic to avoid prosecution and indictments like the ones that came eventually for Andrew Tate and his brother and his helpers. And it's interesting to note that Georgiana and Liliana Radu have more charges in relation to victims than Andrew Tate. So I don't know if they're facing what that account, if they eventually get convicted, how that will translate in terms of sentencing. Obviously, I think that a lawyer could make a really good argument for the two women that they were partially victims. And that was really the issue with the whole NXIVM story. Who's a victim here and who's a perpetrator? And that went throughout the whole story. And even among the NXIVM victims, a lot of them, will disagree privately about who's really, who was more of a perpetrator and who's more of a victim. But this is done for two reasons. For one, it's the one I mentioned, to avoid prosecution. And two, it's done because women, we saw this in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, are much more trusting of other women. So Ghislaine Maxwell in that trial was used. One time I remember there was a witness who was found at Interlochen summer camp. She talks about Ghislaine showing up with Epstein, who had gone to Interlochen summer camp and was a real contributor to that summer camp. And he had his own cabin there, apparently. And she brought her dog. So here a 14 or 15-year-old girl sees Ghislaine Maxwell with a dog. And I always think about that dog being brought as a kind of prop. So not only is she a woman, but she's a woman with a dog, right? Very trustworthy. So that's the idea, is that women are more trusting. And so Keith Raniere, hid his position in DOS. He was really the mastermind behind it all. And so one of the really interesting similarities between Andrew Tate and Keith Raniere is the branding. So And I know that I can hear Andrew Tate's supporters in the audience shouting that tattooing isn't branding, but this is something that he demanded. And there's text messages showing, get a tattoo of me, prove your love. So it was always in this kind of love context, like, you'll work for me. It's better to work at home than be out dealing with other men, meaning we're in this business together. And he promised them, money from it and gave them very little. But that's another thing that's always with these cult leaders, how lazy they are and how little they do. So just to clarify, I said something in the last episode, Keith Raniere did very little. By that, I meant not very little damage, not certainly caused a lot of destruction, but of the actual doing in NXIVM, he did very little. So here are some of, this is Andrew Tate's. My job was to get women to fall in love with it. He's advertising women tattooed with his brand. Here's the NXIVM brand, right? And it says Tate property. Here's another Tate, I'd call it a victim, dedicated to the King Tate back tattoo, right, with Andrew Tate's face. Can you imagine having to have that taken off? Unreal, right? So just an interesting part. So the idea in NXIVM was to have Allison Mack take the fall for the branding and say it was all my idea. This is, of course, before she pled out and removed herself from the cult. But just to give you a little idea, Allison Mack, this is from Vulture. I don't know if sometimes they take off the year. In a new report from the New York Times, so this is before they ever went to court, New York Times Magazine, they went to trial. Keith Raniere went to trial, or before Allison Mack pled out. In a new report from the New York Times Magazine, this is the piece that Vanessa Grigoriadis did, that at least in part seems like it was reported before the arrest of NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere. High-ranking member Allison Mack acknowledges her role in the now infamous practice of ritual branding that's been reported by former members. In a conversation that took place in Mac's Brooklyn home, the actress claimed credit for it as a kind of loyalty pledge. In her apartment, I was surprised to hear Mac take full responsibility for coming up with the DOS cauterized brand. She told me I was like, quote, y'all, a tattoo? People get drunk and tattooed on their ankle, BFF or a tramp stamp. I have 2 tattoos and they mean nothing, unquote. She wanted to do something meaningful, something that took guts. So, of course, that plan fell apart when she broke ties and handed over this recording. And let's just take a listen to it together, shall we? Whoa. Hold on one second. I don't know what happened here. I don't know if it went backwards or forwards. Hold on one second. Let me take a quick break and I will hook this up and I'll be back in a second. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Okay, so this is Allison Mack and Keith Raniere discussing the ideas while they're on a walk in upstate New York together, discussing how they're going to brand women. And they ended up branding women with a cauterizing tool. So they were burning flesh. Really painful.
Keith and Allison, what's the date? The 10th. No, the 9th. January 9th, 6:59 a.m. talking about branding on a walk.
So, I think doing the actual brand in an orderly fashion, each of the 7 strokes, having a certain ritualization, maybe each of the strokes has something that's said with them and maybe repeated after the stroke is done.
So like somebody says the thing while the stroke is being done, and then the person that's getting it done repeats it afterwards?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, you guys come up with something and propose it to me.
Okay.
Well, because you've done it. So what would have been most meaningful, deep, surrendering, focusing for you?
I think it probably having it whispered in my ear and then me repeating it out loud. And then having it whispered in my ear and then me repeating it out loud.
Well, ask the others. It's not all you.
Oh, I thought you were asking me.
No, I said all of.
Did you catch that piece of gaslighting? So he asked her, what would be, the best thing for you, the most surrendering thing for you while you're being branded? What would have been what would have been the best ritual for you? And she says, well, maybe someone whispered. And he goes, well, I'm not just talking about you. There's others. Ask the other people. Like, you're so selfish. What's wrong with you? And she's just answering the question that he laid out for her.
All of you guys who've gone through it.
Yes. Okay.
So this is a little bit later for those who are listening on podcast. Different walk.
The other thing is, you guys did it and you weren't completely nude because you had a outsider and a guy doing it, whoever. Do you think the person who's being branded should be completely nude and sort of held to the table like a sort of almost like a sacrifice? I don't know if that's a feeling of submission, So let's be quiet, huh?
Yeah.
It also, of course, videoing it from different angles or whatever gives collateral. So it probably should be a more vulnerable position type of a thing. Back, legs slightly for legs spread straight, like feet being held to the side of the table, hands probably above the head being held, almost like tied down, like a sacrificial whatever. And the person should ask to be branded.
Okay.
Should say, please brand me, it would be an honor, or something like that. And an honor I want to wear for the rest of my life. I don't know.
Okay.
And that's exactly what they were made to say. Please brand me master. It would be an honor. It's exactly what they were made to say.
And they should probably say that before they're held down, so it doesn't seem like they're being coerced.
Okay.
I don't know. Those are just thoughts.
Okay.
So you can see it was all Allison Mack's idea from listening to the tape. And of course, he had the idea, if we make them say, "Master, please brand me, it would be an honor," then it's not coerced. But he had already taken collateral. And some of the collateral that we heard about in court was one woman, I'm thinking of Nicole, who testified, was an actress, and Allison Mack was her master, direct master. And she wrote, it didn't have to be true, wrote horrible things about her family. And I just remember her weeping in court. So ashamed that she wrote it, and so ashamed that she trusted these people with her secrets. But with Andrew Tate's technique, you already have collateral because it starts out as a love relationship. And who doesn't tell their secrets in the beginning of a love relationship? And also, they're stuck in this compound living with other women, and they're away from their family and their friends. They're isolated. So of course they're going to be sharing private things about themselves. And I'm sure those things were also used against them. And another interesting thing is Andrew Tate would, in the beginning of these, when he was trying to hook in another victim, he would have them text him at a certain time every day, like pick like 1:30, and see if they could do it for a week. And then, of course, they'd have to face all sorts of repercussions if they didn't. And it was like an obedience drill. In my opinion, it seemed like an obedience drill, and it seemed very much like the readiness drills in DOS, where you would have to text back. So if Allison Mack would text you at, like, say, all hours of the morning and night, and you'd have to text back right away and be ready. So, just another very interesting similarity there. And I've heard people say that, this wasn't a cult that could leave any time. And certainly that's going to be the Tate cabal's defense, right? Is that all these women had free agency. Nobody was held there. They could leave anytime they wanted. And I'm very interested in this one aspect, and I haven't read a lot about it. If you have any more information on the way he set up debts. So he would say, I paid for the fare, a breast job, whatever, and you'd have to work it off. And that was, to me, it reminded me of Larry Ray, where he'd make up invisible slights, like, you scratched my pan, you poisoned me, you poisoned your parents, and you'd have to, and the way you made amends for those kind of breaches is always by payment. And the person that handled the money for these supposed debts, of course, was Isabella Pollock, Larry Ray's Ghislaine Maxwell, or Bottom B. So this is not unusual. And for all the people out there saying that this is not trafficking, let's look at Peter Santello's. Santello's? I don't know. Am I pronouncing his name wrong? Probably terribly wrong. Hold on. His video he did on, I think it's called Hookers for Jesus, that group. I think maybe, do they have a new name now? So here's a woman who said that she was a victim of a Romeo pimp. See if this sounds familiar.
Romeo.
But you had a Romeo pimp,
Mm-hmm.
but you're giving sex to all these men for money.
Yeah.
And you didn't hit you as like, that's crazy?
It didn't until maybe a year and a half before I got out.
Is that what you mean by the brainwashing of it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, if you think about it logically, you're like, okay, I'm with a guy and I'm making money for him by having sex with other men. This is insanity.
Yeah.
But if you're under the spell or whatever you want to call it, you're just like, oh, he loves me, I love him.
Yeah,
This
and
is...
I chose this. This is what I do because, and they reinforce that, by the way. They're like, oh man, you're just, I don't want to swear, but let's just say it. You're just a punk that likes to free. Why don't you charge for it? You're giving it away for free.
So you were with Romeo Pimp, which everything started good. Flowers and wine.
That's not how I met him, though.
Okay, how'd you meet him?
Model Mayhem. So, I have pictures. They're on my desk. I'll have to show you later.
Okay.
Want me to go get them?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're right on my desk.
Okay.
They're facing down.
Okay.
So I used to do modeling growing up, things here and there. And I went on Model Mayhem. It's like Facebook for modeling. And there was this photographer that offered his work and I would offer mine. So we kind of switched, you don't have to pay. So the makeup artist there knew my future trafficker at the time, now my ex, and said, oh, he has a magazine shoot for his own magazine out in Vegas. Do you want to go? It's so-and-so. So in November 2011, I went. I met him and it was so legit. He has Holly Madison on the cover. He has Ice Wife Coco on.
And that's something that Andrew Tate says all the time. I'm a professional, right? He's always exalting his position. But essentially, what both of these pimps, I'm talking about Andrew Tate and this woman's pimp, are doing is putting out, a false coercion by lying, right? So Andrew Tate will come out and say, I want a relationship with you. I want to, I don't know, float out the idea of kids and marriage, and we're going to get rich together, right? And if you want to be a professional, you have to do these kind of things, right? This is what this guy's doing. You're going to be a model. But really what it's about is making the pimp rich.
On it, all these celebrities. And I was like, okay, this could be the answer to my prayer, because back then, the economy fell apart in 2007, 2008.
Sure.
People couldn't even pay for gas, all that stuff. Kind of like today, but not that bad. Oh, it's raining.
It's starting to rain.
So that's how I met him. And I talked to him for maybe 5-6 months. And now that I look back, he would say keywords like, you got to be all in or not. You got to make sure you're ready for this. And I was like,
and you're thinking modeling.
Yes. And he's like, you got to be a little risque. I'm like, well, I know Victoria's Secret and stuff like that. And he's like, no, you really got to give it 100. So I flew out to Vegas either at end of June of 2012 or beginning of July and never came back.
Okay. So for all those saying trafficking light, there's a woman who had to spend a long time in a recovery program. She's still in it, I believe, recovering from this kind of abuse. I'm going to take a quick break and rest my voice, and I'll meet you on the other side. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. But I thought some of the more interesting comparisons with Andrew Tate were to the idea that he is starting or has started a cult, like a cult mindset via the internet. And I thought that was very interesting. So basically spreading out his small criminal enterprise into sort of a larger cult mindset. And I think we can look at how he runs his criminal enterprise very much like a cult, right? he surveils his victims. NXIVM also had cameras, and they also lived together in NXIVM. So they'd say, like, why, like, if you didn't live in the compound, like these sort of row of houses, they'd be like, why are you always traveling and paying for money? You could just live here. This is the greatest place. Upstate New York is a great place to live. You should live here. But there were cameras in every single one of those row houses, and you're living with other NXIVM people. So it has two effects. The cameras are watching you, and then the other people in the cult are watching you and prepared to snitch on you. And one of the really interesting things they talk about in cults is how the leader is not really the attraction. And I thought I wanted to share this video with you guys. From Paul Morantz, who fought and really brought down, ultimately it was the IRS who did the fatal blow to the Synanon cult. But Paul Morantz was a lawyer. His book, Escape, is linked in this episode's description. I highly recommend it. He was just an incredible guy. Boy, did I have a lot of admiration after I read his book for all the work he did to help bring down this really dangerous cult. And he got bitten. They put a rattlesnake. They took out the rattle. It was Stan Keaton's son was one of the two men who did it. He was part of the Synanon cult. A lot of musicians went into this cult. I don't know if Stan Keaton's son, Lance Keaton, was a musician, but they actually had their own band. They had tons of businesses, Synanon. It was huge. It said that Hotel California is written about Synanon. And so they put a rattlesnake in his mailbox. He reached in to get his mail, and he got bitten and almost died from it. And William Ramsey, when he interviewed him, in person, Paul Morantz stuck out his hand to shake William Ramsey's hand, and he said it was just, he had forgotten about the snake bite, and it was still terribly damaged from the snake bite. So what he has to say about the leader not being the attraction, I think, is really interesting, as well as his other observations about cults. And I think they do apply to Andrew Tate as well as Raniere and Larry Ray.
Isn't so much the leader, or everyone thinks there's somebody who's working, on one person. The trick is the group. It's the person who's the most influential is the person who's most like you. The system itself is not based on drugs. It's not based on hypnosis, which is what the Manchurian Candidate had tried to suggest to the public. Manchurian Candidate was a great movie, but its system.
NXIVM heavily used hypnosis in the form of neurolinguistic programming, but that is not the thing that ultimately keeps you in.
Was a fable. That level of hypnosis has never existed, and people are not robots. In fact, when you've been subject to brainwashing, you still have freedom of choice. But your choices are based upon what you believe. That's how we make choices. And your beliefs have been changed. And your allegiances have been changed. Your family has been changed. And therefore, you will choose based upon your new family, your new values, your new allegiance, and your new beliefs. How do they do that? Well, the first thing they do is the encounter group. Now, some people have always said, well, there was force or fear in prison, and that people would go along because they sort of had to. It actually has been proven, and Lifton had said it, and another author, Sargent, had said it. It works better outside of prison. Prison was actually a problem. Thought reform began with Mayo converting China to communism in China. And what he had learned through process of trial and error was then used in the prisons. But it was initially used in the universities in China. And you had people being told that they were sick and they needed help and needed to be part of the new society, who came voluntarily looking to change and have benefits. And under that state of mind, transference and success, brainwashing success, was far greater than it was in prisons, where people did not necessarily come in looking to change for benefits. So when you transform to the United States and our society today, when people come.
So with Andrew Tate, men are getting more manly, women are getting more womanly, and performing their real duty, the duty that they're meant to do on earth. So NXIVM had the Society of Protectors, which was to teach men how to be men again, right? And then there's DOS, the Secret Society of Women, so which we saw in court. They played that. So the reason we could hear that tape is because it was evidence played in court of Allison Mack and Keith Raniere talking. But we also saw all the adult X-rated kind of things that they were ordering for this doll society. Really scary stuff. Cages, handcuffs, chains, stuff like that. So it would be interesting to know. I'm glad NXIVM was stopped when it was stopped, but it would be interesting to know where it was headed. Certainly Raniere was very interested in taking power in Mexico. And I wonder the same thing about Tate in Romania. And I'll talk a little bit about that later.
Come into groups already thinking, I want this. You know, they're halfway there before you ever begin. The trick isn't so much the leader, or everyone thinks there's somebody who's working, you know, on one person. The trick is the group. It's the person who's the most influential is the person who's most like you, who's maybe been there a year and a half. And he says to you, hey, you know, Paul, you know, I was kind of like you, and, you know, and I had the same problems you did. And I got to tell you, man, it worked for me. And then everyone chimes in and everyone says how much they want this. And they all seem to be.
So the bottom B says, I've been here. I've made so much money. It's so easy. Let me show you. My life has improved so much, right? And the person in NXIVM says, before NXIVM, and you can even see Allison Mack is in a video saying this, I had what seemed like the perfect life before NXIVM. But thanks to NXIVM, I'm this, that, and the other. I'm, you know, really fulfilled, et cetera, et cetera.
So happy and smiling, and you kind of want that stuff. So it's the guy who's further along the programs that draws you in, not so much the leader who's spouting all the philosophy. It's the group pressure. Simple things like singing songs, simple things of going out and playing together. Anything that bonds people together into a group, and then all you have to do is lead the group. It's what Freud called the herd instinct. And we are subject to it. We adopt to our environments. But at the same time, there's additional pressures. And that is, the key is confession. We all have guilt. We all have things that we think we wish we hadn't done. We all think we hurt our mom or our brother, or we did something wrong, or dad did something wrong to me. And so two things that go on is to have the person build the confession. In males' world, in universities and the prison camps, the confessions were never good enough. It was go back and write more. You haven't confessed enough. And when you finally made your pure confession of what dad did to me and what mom did to me, the message is implied is that, you know, dad and mommy were never very good anyway. Denounce your dad, denounce your mom. We're your mom and dad now. And
you see that with Andrew Tate telling them, you know, pulling them away from their families, saying, I don't want them going home to their family. I want them here or their friends. Really, isolation is very important. But I would also think that working, doing the OnlyFans, and I'm not saying it's real work because I don't take that position, but it's pure exploitation in my opinion. Being exploited in that way, I would think would be so shameful that it would act as a kind of confession. Let me know what you think about that idea in the comment section, this video.
Separate from your family, and this is a new family. And often, like the SLA and Manson, people are given new names just to further. And then you put them in an outfit. You shave their heads and big overalls. You all wear orange. Maybe it's polyester suits, whatever it is, so that you all start to look alike, and you bond stronger.
And you see that with Andrew Tate's women; they all look alike. They've all gotten these giant lips. It seems like a lot of them have, and that really plastic, pornified look.
But the confession, not only by you confessing are you giving yourself to the group, but the group now has intense knowledge of you. And they can use that information. And it's like, do you ever go on a first date, someone you got a crush on? It's like you sit around for many hours and you talk about your personal experiences and confess your most intimate secrets, and you bond and fall in love. Well, that's somewhat what happens in a cult environment, although in a dating situation, your date isn't saying, that's not good enough. I think you're worse than that, and I don't think you're confessing enough. Now I want to hear the truth. Now, that's not quite going on, but that's what goes on in brainwashing.
There's also a movie made about Synanon. Okay. R.I.P. Paul Morantz. What an amazing guy. And I always thought that was a very interesting concept clip, right? And it makes sense, right? The person that is going to pull you in and is going to have the most influence is going to be the person, most like you, that you most relate to. Not so much the leader. So when people say like, well, how could they fall for Raniere? Although I did often think that to myself many times in court, like, this guy is such a nothing burger. I mean, he would talk in these kind of like, I don't know what you call it, word salad. And in the beginning, in the early hearings, he had this, like, he dyed his hair, I don't know, with ballpoint pens. So he had like this black dyed hair that was like so black it like didn't reflect light. It was so weird looking. He looked so dangerous and scary with his hair like that. That was just in the early hearings though. But you think like, what did people see in him? But it's not so much what people saw in Raniere or what they see in Tate. It's the idea. I'm the alpha man. I'm part of this group, right? And they're much more likely to get into it by someone like them, someone their age, someone in their kind of position in society. I'm going to take another quick break and meet you on the other side. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. So I'm going to just close this live stream down pretty soon. I think I'm near the end of what I have to say, but before I do, I just wanted to look at one news story I thought was really interesting, which was when Andrew Tate was in prison, he got caught talking. He was making like these three-way calls, and hold on. Do I not have it? I thought. Okay, here we go. So this is Andrew Tate. Prosecutors claim the former kickboxer tried to recruit Romanian politicians to support him in exchange for votes, which is about one of the dumber things. And I left it out of last live stream, and talking about Andrew Tate being so dumb. I mean, he had to know these calls were recorded. And they also talk about him calling like on a three-way, like calling one person, but having that person connect in another person, which is usually not allowed in U.S. prisons. I don't know. But here's this article. Okay. Controversial internet personality Andrew Tate has been accused by prosecutors of trying to bribe Romanian politicians to aid his release from jail. Tate and his brother Tristan were arrested and have been held in custody since December 2022. The brothers were the subject of a police probe and have been accused of SA, my word, not theirs, human trafficking, and conspiring to form a criminal group. The two have yet to be officially charged for their alleged crimes, but the Romanian government has regularly increased their detainment period by 30 days at a time. And Andrew Tate, I think this is his Instagram or his Twitter. No, this is his Twitter, now X. My body is in jail, but my mind is not in jail. Do you understand? And apparently he was writing about making friends with roaches and stuff, like all these sort of prison cliches. Per Reuters, wiretaps have discovered that Andrew Tate allegedly sought to fight his allegations by trying to recruit two right-wing Romanian politicians. According to the wiretaps, quote, Cobra, unquote, asked two of his associates to approach politicians George Simeon and Diana Ivanovici Soskachka to tell them that he was being framed. Tate also suggested that supporting his case would be, quote, very good, unquote, for their political careers. In the wiretap, Tate allegedly told his associates, quote, so make it clear to them, you will get a lot of votes when Tate says you took their side, unquote. The former kickboxing champion was also recorded asking one of his friends to publish a video on social media of one of the alleged human trafficking victims dancing. Quote, yes, put them everywhere and say, quote, this girl says she is kidnapped when she is not kidnapped, unquote. Yes, screw them, unquote. So where have we heard that? That's the big refrain of Andrew Tate, his brother, and his supporters all saying, this victim says she's kidnapped when she's not kidnapped. And that's, no one's saying that. It's not part of the charges. Andrew Tate addresses his drastic change in appearance. Okay, so that'll give you an idea of what he did in prison. I mean, so stupid, so dumb, right? But the smartest man in the world, the man Keith Raniere with his 240 IQ, never mind that his underaged victim really took that take-home IQ test, and she was the genius, which is a pattern with Keith Raniere. He had, of course, Daniela, who he kept in a room for 2 years, one of 3 sisters who, for the crime of falling in love with a man that wasn't Keith Raniere, kept her in a room with one empty room with, she saw one person, Lauren Salzman, and her family was living their life in that same house. So when she testified that she could hear her family members living life, and she was stuck in this room, trapped. They had taken away her passport, something I hear Andrew Tate does. But before she got exiled to this room for this terrible crime for 2 years, some of the most horrible testimony I've ever heard in my life, she organized Keith Raniere's library and read all the really difficult and important books. And she would make sort of cliff notes for Keith Raniere about these books, because she, in fact, did have a genius IQ and infinitely talented. But they threw her back to Mexico with no papers, and she had to live hand to mouth for years until she could get back on her feet. But she chose that life over living in the NXIVM cult with her family. And that will tell you something about, you know, how difficult that kind of existence was. But she was really another genius that Raniere sucked all the life out of, talent out of, that he didn't have himself. And that was another thing that, you know, one of the victims remarked on in his sentencing hearing was that he didn't have the courage to testify in the way that the victims did. But isn't it unusual that Keith Raniere had the same kind of dumb moment caught on tape from prison? Hold on one second. Let me just pull it up. NXIVM cult leaders, jailhouse call to disciples. The judge needs to know he's being watched. And this is from August 2020. So, as NXIVM leader Keith Raniere awaits sentencing for using the self-help group as a S cult, I guess I'll say, for his personal pleasure, prosecutors say he is still issuing demands to his disciples from inside a prison cell and has, quote, demonstrated a complete lack of acceptance and responsibility for his crimes, unquote. One of those commands was to, quote, get scrutiny, unquote, on the Brooklyn federal judge who will issue his sentence for several S crimes in October, prosecutors said in a sentencing memo filed late Thursday. Another was to get pundits, including Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz, to speak on his behalf. And he eventually does speak. If look up the videos, he's on YouTube videos with other legal experts saying that Raniere was denied a fair trial, and it was absolutely a bunch of nonsense. But I guess, in my opinion, that's what Claire Bronfman's money will buy you. A lot of experts to say that you've been, quote, wrongly convicted, unquote. And okay, back to the article. And he allegedly wanted a podcast created with a $25,000 cash prize that would entice listeners to find, quote, purported errors in Raniere's prosecution and trial, unquote. And right after that, Amanda Knox comes out in support of Keith Raniere, and we never hear about that cash prize again. So I always wonder if it was split up among Raniere and Amanda Knox to support him. But that is just a little bit of this, just another crazy similarity, that these supposedly brilliant men were both stupid in the same exact way. I mean, how much dumber can you get than threatening the judge on tape from prison? And how much dumber can you get when you're in a Romanian jail looking to get out on bail? Would you start making phone calls saying, let's try to bribe some Romanian politicians? I mean, it's so dumb. And that's why I think that this, I don't know, like I've said before, I don't know much about Romanian law. I don't know. And also it's a huge insult. I don't know how it's going to go, but if it's a fair trial, I can see him getting convicted and sentenced to the maximum, and his co-defendants, same thing. I see this as a slam dunk for a prosecutor. I mean, how much better can you get? Like, oh, especially if any of these defendants decide to give evidence, right? In their own, take the stand and give evidence. I don't know how these trials are set up. If that's, I assume that they would have an opportunity to do so. But I mean, can you imagine? Oh no, everybody could leave. Nobody. Well, what, Mr. Tate here? What about this text message dated blah, 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 where you say, I don't want her to leave. She can't leave without Luana. She can't leave without Georgiana. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, he can be very charming and slick as he wants on the stand. He's just made so much evidence and put it right in the prosecutor's hand. Not that I'm sad about that, but for all those saying that this is this kind of borderline case, I can't. I mean, of any of the cases I've talked about, this is certainly up there with Purvis Payne and the guiltiest people alive, just because he's created so much evidence against himself. It's wild. And Keith Raniere obviously was a little bit smarter, but not much, but not by much. So that's what I have for today. Have a great rest of the week, rest of the day, and I'll see you back here next time. Have a good one, everybody.